I sold our family's last land in St. Mary. 4 generations rested under that soil. Mango trees, coconut palms, and footsteps from long before I was born. It wasn't just land, it was everything we were. And I let it go. For a wedding. Not just any wedding, but my son's dream. Beachfront, gold-trimmed tables, chandeliers hanging under the sky. I thought I was giving him joy. I thought I was giving him pride. Instead, when I arrived, they sat me near the trash bins. I saw the flies before I saw my seat. And when I looked at him, he smiled. Like I belonged there. Like that was all right. I didn't say a word. I didn't fight. But what happened later, at the reception, shut that whole room down. Have you ever been shamed by the very person you built your life around? The one you gave everything to, only to be treated like nothing? Thank you for sitting here with me. You didn't have to, but you chose to listen. And that means more than you know. Stories like this, they're not loud. They don't come with fireworks. They just sit quiet, waiting for someone who'll care enough to hear them through. So if you're watching right now, if this found you in a quiet moment, I want you to know, I see you. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you feel like sharing, leave a comment below. Just a place, a feeling, a small hello. I read everyone. And if someone you once poured your heart into made you feel like you were a mistake, like your presence was too much or your love was in the way, you don't have to explain anything. Just write, I'm healing now. That's enough. Because sometimes the smallest words carry the heaviest truth. And this space, right here, is safe for yours. That land in St. Mary wasn't just soil and grass, it was history. It held footsteps of people long gone, voices that used to fill the air with laughter and songs at dusk. My grandfather built the first part of the house with his bare hands, and my grandmother used to tie her headscarf tight and hum while she watered the callaloo. My mother gave birth to me in that house, and we buried her under the almond tree when the time came. It wasn't bought with money, it was earned through aching backs, through storms that blew the roof off twice, and through funeral tears. 4 generations stood on that land. I knew where every stone came from, every tree planted, every story whispered on its breeze. That land raised us, it shaped us. And for most of my life, I believed I'd leave it behind one day in better hands than mine. But life rarely hands you what you expect. I was widowed young. Too young to wear black for the rest of my years, but I did. I remember hanging the clothes on the line with one arm while holding my son in the other. He was all cheeks and bright eyes, and when he looked up at me and called me mama in that soft lilt, I used to think maybe this is what I was meant for. Maybe this boy is my reward for everything life tried to take from me. I poured everything I had into raising him, every bit of strength, every coin I could save, every moment of patience I could scrape from tired bones. I did without so he could have. I stayed so he could leave. And he did leave. To the States. With a suitcase full of dreams and a head full of plans. At first he called every Sunday. Told me about classes, about how different things were over there, how big everything was. And I'd sit on the edge of my bed and picture him in this new world, hoping it would be good to him. But Sunday calls turned into every other Sunday. Then once a month. Then silence. Not out of malice, I told myself. Just life. Busy life. Maybe it was better that way. Maybe he was building something. But I kept the land waiting, just in case. I kept the house swept, I kept the gate mended, I cooked on holidays even if it was just me and the radio. I told people he's coming home soon. He's just busy right now. But time stretched, and so did the distance. Until all I had were memories of his laughter and the sound of his name fading on my tongue. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd heard his voice when the phone finally rang. I was shelling peas on the veranda, half asleep in the heat when I picked up and heard, "Hey mama." Just like that. Like no time had passed. Like silence hadn't built its own little home between us. My heart didn't know whether to be joyful or cautious. I smiled, even though I was scared to. I asked how he'd been, where he was living, how life was treating him. He gave me quick answers, nothing deep. Then he said he had news. He was getting married. Said she was beautiful, smart, everything he ever wanted. Said they'd met at work and it just felt right. And I listened, nodding, trying to feel close to a life I knew nothing about. He started talking about the wedding. Said they wanted something different. Something unforgettable. A destination wedding, by the beach. Soft lights overhead, a live band playing as the waves rolled in. I could hear the excitement in his voice. I could feel him painting the dream with every word. I waited for him to mention where I'd fit in all that. But he never did. He didn't say he missed me, didn't say he was sorry for the time lost. He just kept talking about florals and photographers and menus. Then he said, "It's just the venue, Mama. The deposit alone's steep, but it's once in a lifetime, right?" I knew that tone. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a door being left open, just enough for me to walk through and offer something. He never said, "Can you help me?" But I could feel the weight of the ask in between every pause. And I wanted to be useful. I wanted to matter again. I told him I'd think on it. But the truth is, I already knew what I was going to do. I sat that night in the kitchen, staring at the title deed. The paper was thin but felt heavier than stone. I lit a candle beside me, prayed over it like I was preparing to bury something sacred. The next morning, I went to the lawyer, signed the documents, arranged the sale. The buyer didn't ask questions, just looked at the size of the plot and smiled like he'd gotten lucky. Maybe he had. I walked out of that office with my hands shaking and my throat dry, but I told myself it was worth it. It had to be. I wired the money, $48,000 in total, enough to cover the venue and more, enough to give him what I thought every mother dreamed of giving. I didn't tell him how much I sold it for, didn't ask what exactly the money would be used for. I just waited for his reply. What I got was a link to the wedding website and a guest code to RSVP. No thank you, no voice message. Just a forwarded link with a date, a location, and a color scheme. That was all. And I sat there reading it over and over, trying to find the warmth that never came. After the money left my account, I didn't hear from them for a while. Just a few updates now and then. What kind of flowers they picked, what song they chose for their first dance. But none of it was ever directed at me. It was like I was a silent partner in a company I helped fund, but wasn't really invited to walk through the front door. Still, I told myself to stay grateful. Maybe they were busy. Maybe this was how things worked now. Maybe the thank you would come when I saw him in person. One morning, I got a message with the wedding theme, lilac and gold. She had always liked lilac. He told me that once, back when they first got engaged, said it made her feel soft, elegant, like spring. I held on to that detail like it meant something. So I decided to show up in lilac. Not just because it matched the colors, but because I wanted her to know I was thinking of her. That I honored her. That even if I wasn't a loud part of their world, I could still show I was present. So I went down to the tailor's shop in town, the same woman who had sewn my dress for my sister's funeral. I brought her a photo of a long-sleeved lilac gown I saw in a magazine, simple and graceful. We picked the fabric together, smooth and soft to the touch. I asked her to stitch it slow with care, so it would fall just right. And when I put it on in the mirror for the final fitting, I smiled a little. Not because I felt beautiful, but because I felt like I belonged. Like maybe, in some small way, I was stepping into a place I had been invited to stand. I packed light. Just the dress, my shoes, a comb, and a gold necklace I hadn't worn since his graduation. I carried them all in a borrowed garment bag and zipped it shut like it held something fragile. The morning of the flight, I woke early, made tea I couldn't finish, and sat at the window until the sun came up. I imagined the moment I'd arrive, how he'd see me in lilac and smile, how she might say thank you for the dress, for the land, for helping make their day possible. I held on to that image like a prayer. At the airport, I stood near the exit doors, waiting for someone to appear with my name on a card. I waited with strangers who looked around with expectation. Some were greeted with hugs, others with drivers. I waited. 10 minutes turned into 30. No one came. I checked my phone. No missed calls. I waited a little longer. Then I took a deep breath and flagged down a taxi myself. Told the driver the name of the resort. He didn't speak much, but he drove quiet and fast, like someone used to moving people who don't quite belong. I looked out the window as palm trees passed, and I clutched the garment bag close to my chest, careful not to wrinkle it. I told myself maybe they thought I'd come a different day. Maybe they were caught up with last-minute things. Maybe it didn't mean anything. I told myself that so many times, I almost believed it. But somewhere deep in my chest, where truth doesn't lie, I knew. But I still kept going. Because sometimes, even when the welcome is missing, the heart still shows up. The taxi pulled into the resort's roundabout with smooth gravel under the tires, and I remember taking a breath so deep it almost hurt my ribs. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror before stepping out. Fixed the side of my hair, smoothed the line of my dress, adjusted the necklace just enough so the pendant would rest at the center of my chest. I wasn't nervous, not exactly, but something inside me was unsettled, like a hand gently pressing on my chest. Still, I thanked the driver, stepped out with my heels clicking lightly on the stone path, and walked toward the soft hum of music that floated on the air. The sun was high, casting gold on everything, and the ocean beyond the setup was shimmering like something out of a painting. White chairs lined the aisle in perfect symmetry. Lavender fabric waved gently with the breeze, tied to wooden arches. It was beautiful. Every detail looked expensive, cared for, planned. But as I walked closer, my steps slowed. People turned to glance. Polite, curious, confused. I smiled gently, hoping to meet a familiar face, but none of them smiled back. And when I walked past the speakers and crossed the edge of the tent, it felt like something shifted in the air. The music didn't actually stop, but it felt like it had. Like every note skipped. Like someone hit pause just long enough for me to feel it in my bones. There was a girl at the welcome table. Young, maybe 19, dressed in lavender and holding a stack of printed programs. She handed one to me without looking up, already offering it to the next guest before I even reached for mine. I stepped to the side, opened it slowly, and began to read. The bride's name, the groom's name, the ceremony outline, the names of the bridal party, parents of the bride, grandparents of the bride, bridesmaids, groomsmen, page boys, ushers, sponsors, everyone listed with care, everyone but me. No mother of the groom, no mention of my name, not even a line. It was like I hadn't existed at all. Just my son and a woman I hardly knew, taking their vows beneath the Caribbean sky as if they'd built their lives alone. I didn't cry. Not then. I folded the program neatly and slipped it into my bag. Then I looked around, unsure of where to sit. The front row was full, each seat marked with names written in gold script. The next row too. I scanned the layout, trying to find a place where I wouldn't be in the way, where I might still see him clearly when he walked in. That's when she saw me, the bride. She was standing under one of the side tents with a group of women, holding a bouquet of white orchids, laughing softly. Our eyes met, and for a split second I thought she might come over, say something, make a space for me. But her eyes just drifted past mine, like I was someone else's guest. Like I was part of the staff. Like maybe I wasn't supposed to be there at all. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She turned back to her conversation, the corner of her mouth lifting politely as someone handed her a glass of champagne. And I stood there for a few more seconds, holding the program in one hand and the strap of my bag in the other, trying to swallow a feeling I didn't have words for. I told myself maybe she was nervous, caught up in the moment. That maybe the kindness would come later after the vows. Maybe my place would be clearer then. But part of me knew better. And yet, I stayed. I kept standing, looking for somewhere to sit, trying not to show how deeply lost I already felt. It must have been 10, maybe 15 minutes that I stood there pretending I was just enjoying the view, pretending I wasn't waiting for someone to notice me, to say something, to make room. And then she walked over. The bride. She looked beautiful, I won't lie. Hair pinned up, delicate earrings, her dress soft and flowing like wind over silk. She had the kind of glow people talk about when they speak of happiness. And maybe she was happy. Maybe all this really was her dream. She smiled at me as she approached, but not the kind of smile that reaches the eyes. It was the kind of smile you wear when you've already decided how a conversation will end before it starts. She leaned in slightly and said, with that smooth, airy tone people use when they're trying to stay pleasant, "Oh, I'm so glad you made it." We didn't want to overwhelm the guests. It's mostly his colleagues, business people. Hope you understand. Then she gently touched my arm, like she was handing me a tissue instead of a table assignment, and turned to one of the staff. A young man in a dark vest and white gloves nodded and pointed behind the tent. I followed him. dress brushing the side of my legs as I stepped through the uneven grass, heels sinking slightly into the earth. He led me around the back edge of the setup, where the laughter grew more distant and the scent of flowers faded into the thick, oily smell of waste bins. There, tucked in the shadow of the catering tent, was a plastic table. One of those fold-out kinds you use when you run out of real ones. No decoration. No name card. Just a chair. A single chair, half shaded by a palm that leaned too far to the left. He gestured with his hand and said nothing, then disappeared back toward the music. I stood there, staring at it. The heat back there was heavier, thicker, like the air had nowhere to go. I could smell food, old food, being scraped off plates and dumped into bins just a few steps behind me. The hum of flies hovered near the lids, and every now and then someone from the catering crew would slide past, holding trays of dishes, never looking my way. I sat down slowly, careful not to let the back of my dress touch the edge of the bin. I placed my purse in my lap, folded my hands over it, and sat very still. I watched. That's all I did. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice or ask to be moved. I didn't call for him. I didn't even wave. I just sat there and looked out at the gathering I had paid for. My son in a cream suit, smiling as he shook hands with people I'd never met. Laughter, clinking glasses, the sound of music drifting through the warm breeze, plates of food being carried on silver trays, soft lights hanging above crystal centerpieces. Everything I had helped fund, every detail I had silently supported, unfolding before me like a play I was never cast in. No one asked me if I was okay. No one asked me why I was sitting so far. And maybe they didn't see. Or maybe they did, and thought I belonged exactly where they'd put me. I held my purse tight, not because there was anything precious inside, but because it gave my hands something to do. I stared straight ahead, not wanting to look at the bins beside me, not wanting to smell the proof of everything discarded. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. I was not part of their picture. I was the cost behind it. The sacrifice in silence, the name not listed, the chair in the back, the face beside the trash. But I stayed seated, because sometimes it's not the one who walks away that leaves the strongest message. It's the one who stays, quietly, and sees everything. Long before I booked the flight, long before I folded my lilac dress into that garment bag, I had planned something special. A surprise, something thoughtful, something they would remember years from now. I told myself that if I couldn't give them everything, at least I could give them memory. A way to hold on to the beauty of that day. So I reached out to a young man I knew, quiet, respectful, with a camera always slung across his shoulder. Not one of those fast-talking, flashy types. No, this one listened. He paid attention. He made stories feel real. I hired him privately, told him to document the day, not just with video, but with voice. I asked him to interview guests, capture honest words from the people who mattered, blend laughter with little moments, and turn it all into a gift they could watch on anniversaries. A keepsake. Something warm and lasting. I told him not to mention my name unless asked. Let it be a surprise when they watched it later. A small way for me to say, this mattered to me too. But as the day unfolded, as I sat near the bins and watched the celebration from the shadows, something inside me shifted. The smile on my face stayed soft, but behind my eyes something very old, something very tired, woke up. I realized this wasn't just a celebration I had helped create. This was a lesson being handed to me. A final page in a chapter I didn't know was ending. And while I sat there, the camera boy passed near me once, nodding politely, waiting for instruction. I called him over, quiet and calm. I told him plans had changed, that the story wasn't in the centerpieces or the aisle walk. It wasn't in the speeches or the garland overhead. The story was in what had been paid for, and by whom. I reached into my bag and pulled out a plain brown envelope. Inside, I had placed everything. The deed showing the sale of the land in St. Mary, signed and sealed. The wire transfer slip from the bank with every cent accounted for. A copy of the jewelry receipt, those gold bands they slipped on their fingers, the ones the bride posted about online. The invoice from the seamstress who stitched my lilac dress by hand. Even the luggage receipt from my hotel stay, which I paid for myself, since no one thought to include me in the accommodation plans. I handed it all to him, one by one. His eyes flicked over the documents, unsure at first, then steady. I told him, record everything. I said, "Don't cut it. Don't blur it. Don't soften the truth. Put it all in." He asked gently if I wanted to speak into the camera. I told him no. My voice wasn't what needed to be heard. The truth was in the paper, in the ink, in the numbers. Let the evidence speak for itself. Let it sit where my words might tremble. He nodded, packed it carefully, and walked off without question. And I sat back down, still near the bins, still holding my purse, still invisible. But this time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt clear. Sometimes silence is louder than anger. Sometimes dignity doesn't walk away. It stays right where it was put and refuses to shrink. And I knew, when that footage played, when the music faded and the facts rolled across the screen, it wouldn't be me they'd forget. It would be the moment they chose not to see me. And that would be the memory they couldn't erase. The sun had started to dip by then, casting a soft orange over the sky, turning the whole setting into something that almost looked like a painting. The kind people frame and hang up to remember a day that felt perfect. But as I sat there, near the bins, the scent of spoiled food still rising every time someone walked past, I knew that for me, this wasn't a memory I'd ever want to hang. The laughter got louder. Plates were being cleared and replaced, champagne flutes clinked like tiny bells. People toasted to love, to the future, to a union they barely understood. And I stayed right where I was. No one brought me a plate. No one asked if I'd eaten. No one asked me to say a few words about the boy I'd raised with the kind of love that costs you sleep, savings, and pieces of your own body. I watched them dance under fairy lights I helped pay for. Watched the servers bring out cake stands and floral displays taller than me. Someone got up to tell a story about how kind my son was, how generous. And I smiled, not because I believed it, but because I understood the version of him they were clapping for. He was generous to them, but they didn't know what it meant to hand over land with your father's sweat still buried under the roots. They didn't know what it took to sign your name away so that someone else could have a perfect weekend. I smiled, but not because it was funny. Because silence has a shape. And sometimes it wears a smile to keep from shattering. I didn't speak. Not even when the MC asked if there were any final blessings from family before the couple shared their first dance. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't move. I let the moment pass like so many others that had passed in my life, unnoticed. Because sometimes you don't interrupt the celebration. You let it roll. You let everyone clap and cheer and believe what they want. Not because you agree, but because you know the truth is already on its way. And then, just as the crowd began to shift, just as the music began to swell, the cameraman I had hired quietly made his way toward the microphone. He didn't smile. He didn't make a show of it. He simply leaned in and said, "Before the couple's dance, I'd like to play a short clip from the family." There was a soft murmur across the tent. People turned toward the screen, expecting a slideshow, maybe some cute interviews or childhood photos. My son looked confused. The bride tilted her head. The music faded slowly, and a hush swept over the room. I remained seated behind the tent, where the scent of old food lingered, and the catering staff whispered among themselves. But my heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just sat still and watched, knowing the moment I had prepared for had finally arrived. The screen flickered to life, casting a pale glow across the dance floor. At first it showed nothing but a black frame with white words slowly fading in. There was no music. No playful montage, just a quiet stillness, the kind that makes people shift in their seats without knowing why. And then came the first image, paper, creased and signed, the title deed from St. Mary. The room didn't know what it was at first, but I did. I knew every corner of that document, knew the curve of my signature at the bottom, knew what it cost me to sign it. And then my voice came through the speakers, not loud, not emotional, just calm, measured, steady. "This is the deed to the land in St. Mary. 4 generations worked this soil. Hands calloused from machetes and sun. Feet planted deep in the ground we never planned to leave. I sold it so my son could have his day." There were gasps, small, stifled ones. One woman near the center covered her mouth. A man leaned forward, confused. I could hear chairs creak as people adjusted their posture. My son didn't move. He stood still in the middle of it all, frozen like the moment had pressed itself too hard against his chest. The bride's smile dropped slowly, almost reluctantly, like it had just realized it didn't belong on her face anymore. The screen shifted again. A copy of the wire transfer, every figure laid bare, the bank's watermark stamped clear. My voice continued, unbothered by the silence falling over the room. This is the transfer. $48,000, paid without question, given without conditions. Because love, real love, doesn't always wait for the perfect timing. It gives when asked, and sometimes when not. Next came the receipt for the rings, the close-up of the invoice, the logo of the jeweler. The date stamped neatly at the bottom. The bride's hand instinctively went to her ring, touching it gently, like it might suddenly burn. This is the jewelry. The bands they now wear. Bought with hands that gave up everything without expecting anything in return. And then, finally, the dress. A quiet shot of it hanging on the back of a wooden door. Lilac, smooth and full, sleeves draped carefully over a hanger. The hem stitched with care. This is the dress I wore to honor my daughter-in-law's favorite color. I chose it not because I wanted to be seen, but because I wanted to belong in this. The screen cut to a shaky clip, just a few seconds of my table behind the tent. A plastic chair, a bin to the left, the shadow of a server walking past with a tray of used plates. This is the table they gave me, near the trash, out of sight, out of mind. And that was all. The screen went dark. Not a single clap, not a single word, just silence. The kind that doesn't ask for attention, the kind that demands it. I stayed seated behind the tent, hands folded gently in my lap, heart beating slow and full. I didn't smile, I didn't cry, I just breathed. Because finally, I had been heard. At first, no one moved. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from not knowing what to do with the truth once it's been laid bare. I could hear whispers start to ripple, soft at first, then gathering like wind through tall grass. Someone near the front muttered something under their breath, and I caught a cousin near the center mouthing, "What the hell?" Eyes darted around the tent like people were trying to piece together what they had just seen, wondering how long they had been part of a story they hadn't understood. One of the bride's friends stood up slowly, looking across the tent toward me. She hesitated, then walked toward where I was sitting and touched my shoulder gently. She didn't say a word. She just nodded, then pulled out a chair beside me as if to say, "I see you now," but it was too late. The bride stood frozen, still holding her glass, her smile trying to climb back onto her face but falling flat with every passing second. She let out a little laugh, the kind people use when they don't know whether to pretend or panic. She said something about a misunderstanding, about how things get lost in planning, how families are complicated. But no one clapped, no one nodded. Even the servers paused, unsure whether to keep moving or wait. Her words spilled like water on a table, spreading everywhere but soaking nothing. My son just stood there. He didn't reach for her. He didn't reach for me. He looked down once, then straight ahead, never toward where I sat, not even for a second. And in that quiet refusal to meet my eyes, I heard all the words he didn't say. I heard the apology wrapped in shame. I heard the knowing. I heard the weight of choices made and the truth he could no longer dodge. And somehow, that silence between us was more honest than anything he might have said. Because it told me he knew. And knowing was enough. I didn't wait for the next song. I didn't wait for them to cut the cake. I stood up slowly, straightened the fabric of my dress, and gathered my things. The woman beside me looked up, as if to ask if I needed anything, but I shook my head gently. There was nothing more to be done. Nothing more to be said. I walked back around the edge of the tent, heels pressing into the earth, past the bins, past the catering crew, past the laughter that had already grown uneasy. No one stopped me, no one called after me. But every head turned, not in pity, not in shame, but in quiet reckoning. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was unforgettable. And I didn't need a seat at the table to make that true. I had built the table. They were just late to realize it. Weeks passed without a word. Not a single message, no missed calls. Just silence wrapped in shame, hanging heavy over the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. And I didn't chase it. I didn't reach out to ask how they were doing, didn't scroll through the photos that others posted from the wedding, didn't wonder whether they talked about me in private. I let the silence stand. I let it speak for itself. Then one evening, Just as the light began to fall across my living room in soft amber streaks, the phone rang. I didn't answer right away. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, and then I picked it up, calm and steady. It was him. His voice sounded like someone walking on a floor they weren't sure could hold their weight. He didn't say hello the way he used to. No warmth, no lightness, just tension, stretching out between us like a rope pulled too tight. He didn't ask how I was, didn't ask if I'd made it home safe. He just said, "Why did you do that?" Not with anger, but with confusion, the kind that comes from being seen more clearly than you wanted. And I took a moment before answering. I looked out the window, where the breeze moved the leaves just enough to catch the last of the sunlight. And I said, quiet and certain, "So you'd remember who built this day with her bare hands." There was nothing after that. Not right away. Just a breath on the line. The kind you take when you realize there's no argument left. He didn't defend himself, didn't deny it. He just let the silence settle, and I let it be. We both knew the truth didn't need to be said twice. A few weeks after that call, I went to Portland. Not for any special reason. I just needed air that felt different. Needed to walk land that hadn't been bought with grief. I found a small plot there, tucked behind an old church, with soft soil, enough space for a house and a garden. It wasn't much, not compared to St. Mary. But it was mine. Mine with my name on the papers, signed without regret. No one could take it. No one could erase me from it. No one could forget me on it. I used what I had left, not much, but enough. I signed the papers, took the keys, and stood on that patch of earth like it was a piece of my heart that had been waiting to come back home. I didn't waste time. I cleared the brush myself. Hands in the dirt, knees in the grass, sun on my back. I planted callaloo in straight rows, just the way my mother taught me. Dug a place for sweet peppers, their seeds small and promising. And near the edge, where the light was just right, I planted a mango sapling, young and thin but strong. I named it Hope, not out loud but in my heart. I didn't plant it for shade. I planted it because one day when it bears fruit, I'll know it grew from a place where I was not forgotten. This land doesn't carry old footsteps. It doesn't echo names from the past, but it listens and it honors. Because every inch of it knows who I am. Every corner remembers my hands. I plant what feeds, not what forgets. What roots itself in truth and rises without apology. And when the wind moves through it, it sounds nothing like shame. It sounds like peace. If someone ever made you feel like trash, like you didn't belong in the very space you helped create, I want you to remember something. Where they put you doesn't decide who you are. Placement doesn't define worth. I sat by the bins, but I was never disposable. I was the reason they had that day to celebrate. And they forgot. Or maybe they never cared to remember. But I did. I remembered, and I watched. They thought my silence meant I had nothing to say. But silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's what you choose when you know that noise won't make people see you. So I watched. I waited, and when the time came, the truth spoke loud enough for me. Tell me below, have you ever given something so big only to be erased from the moment it built? Or just right? I'm healing now. That's enough. It means you're still standing. It means you're finding your way. And if you're watching this alone, quietly like I once was, this light, it's for you. Please subscribe if any of this touched a piece of your story, and come back, I'll be right here. Truth doesn't expire, it just waits. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video.